Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Lippincott Talk. I am your host, Josiah Lippincott. Today I want to talk about birthright citizenship. Yesterday, the Supreme Court considered oral arguments in the case Trump v. Barbara, which deals with the legitimacy of Trump's executive order, in which he commands federal executive agencies to not acknowledge the children of illegal immigrants as citizens of the United States. That order fundamentally deals with, and the case at stake here deals with interpretations of the 14th Amendment itself. What does citizenship mean? Who is a citizen? How do we know? The arguments the left makes is that anyone who is born on American soil is automatically subject to receive American citizenship. This hinges on a legal interpretation of the 14th Amendment. I can read that amendment right here. The first sentence of the 14th Amendment says, all persons born or naturalized in the United States and subject to the jurisdiction thereof are citizens of the United States and of the state wherein they reside. Conservatives point out that it says both all persons born or naturalized and subject to the jurisdiction. It's both and. You need to both be born here and be subject to the jurisdiction thereof. The left argues if you're born here, you're automatically subject to the jurisdiction of the United States and therefore should receive citizenship. That's the key legal argument that's at stake here. If you want to see the best legal argumentation, lawyer arguments, if that kind of constitutional argumentation is interesting to you, I'm going to recommend you read John Eastman's amicus brief in this case. He is associated with the Constitutional Counsel Group. The argument there is good. I've read Eastman's work for years, and I think it's really helpful. If you want to hear or you want to understand a history of the 14th Amendment itself and its meaning, the best source I know of is an essay by Ed Erler entitled From Subjects to Citizens, The Social Compact Origins of American Citizenship. You can find that in the book, The American Founding and the Social Compact. There's a PDF copy on the website for the Claremont Institute. The best articulation of the fundamental principles of the American regime relating to citizenship from the beginning is found in Tom West's book, Vindicating the Founders, Race, Sex, Class, and Justice in the Origins of America. So West has a nice chapter, Immigration and the Moral Conditions of Citizenship. He lays out the argument for immigration restriction from the founders' point of view, from their understanding of justice. It's a nice articulation of the fundamental documents at stake. He also goes through the writings and speeches of the founders on these issues. It's a nice presentation. It's very good. What I want to talk today about in part is the view of justice at stake here and the political question. There's a lot of conservatives online. I think Kurt Schlichter had this tweet where, well, there's people back and forth. The idea of, if the Supreme Court rules against Trump right now, then we lose the country forever. If the Supreme Court says birthright citizenship is in the Constitution, where do we go from here? How can we have a country if we can't exclude illegal immigrants, their children, from becoming citizens? Then the law doesn't have any meaning. So there's a lot of blackpilling going on, that if this doesn't go through, we lose everything. It's all over. We lose 2028. Everything's done. On the other hand, there are those who, and that's, I think, the dominant view. And obviously the left's arguments here are nuts. Like, just legally and constitutionally, like I will say, Eastman and Erler are correct. As far as it goes, the 14th Amendment was never intended to apply to illegal immigrants. Point blank, period. No, that's not what that was for. That was for the citizens, that was for the children of slaves who had been freed and that were living in the United States. They were effectively stateless individuals, and the 14th Amendment granted them citizenship as part of the Reconstruction Amendments in the attempt to bring the country back together after the war. What do you do with the former freed slaves and their children? Which regime do they belong to? The 14th Amendment was meant to address that question. If you like the legal arguments, you want to hear about Wong Kim Ark, whether, the child of domiciled immigrants, the meaning of domiciled in American law and how that interprets the 14th Amendment, Eastman's your guy. You can go get a very clear articulation there. Again, if you want to do the history of the view of justice in the American regime, West. He's got a great articulation of what the founding principles were, what they meant for immigration policy. What I want to emphasize here today, though, is no matter how you slice and dice this case, and no matter what the Supreme Court rules, the core question of what citizenship means has not gone away. And moreover, the really deep question of what citizenship should mean is still a live issue. If the Supreme Court rules in favor of Donald Trump and rules that the children of illegal immigrants are not American citizens automatically and need to be naturalized, it will still not answer for us the question of who should be an American citizen. What is citizenship in itself? What is citizenship for? Those questions are still unanswered in our regime, and there is no Supreme Court case or legal argumentation that is going to go to the heart of our political order and answer those questions in a satisfactory way. Sovereignty precedes law, and law precedes adjudication. So the problem is, people, lawyers especially, they get trained. They're trained in the cult, in the profession. They've gone through the seminary. They've gotten the holy texts, and so now they can cite precedent and they can claim in defendant this case. Ooh, I'm a lawyer. The Federalist Society, man, I'm respected there. I wear a bow tie. I've got a flag pin. I go to the conference. Yes. Wong Kim Ark. Yes. Precedent. This is very important. And it is, in its way. It's important for understanding the law. But the deeper questions are always political. And they're about justice. And they're a matter of sovereign decision. And there's no amount of FedSoc meetings or high IQ legal reasoning that's going to answer the question of where does the law come from and what is justice. And I want to highlight that here. That's what I want to do. I think Tom West's work is the helpful entry point into making these questions clear. And I want to, for a moment, let's just set all of the political questions, let's just set aside the legal questions overall. Why does the left want birthright citizenship? Why do leftists like this? And I believe the reason flows directly from their view of justice, which is that the least among us, the oppressed, the marginalized, minorities, however you want to define that, should have a right to the resources and taxpayer dollars of the oppressor, of the white, Christian, straight, heteronormative, patriarchal men and their allies who are also bad. And, there's a whole framework, right? There's the genealogy of and the taxidermy of the different groups of oppressor classes and oppressed groups, and there's a hierarchy. And it's all very important that you know this. And the point of going to college in America is to be able to navigate these fine distinctions in social circumstances so you can elevate yourself. That's the left's view, though. The reason the left wants birthright citizenship is because they want to deny to Americans the right to have a country. They want to deny that the traditional American population, the American people, the founding heritage Americans, founding Americans, their allies, everyone who's on that team, right? The Americans who want to have their rights secured, who want to have their life, liberty, and happiness protected. Those Americans, what the left wants to do is justify taking resources from that group of people and transferring those resources to themselves and to their preferred political clients. Their view of justice flows from a fundamental resentment and longing for power. And so the legal arguments about birthright citizenship really aren't about the issue itself. And so the moment you get sucked into the legal argumentation, you're avoiding the fundamental moral and psychological question and impulses that are driving all of this. And what's missing now is the ability to confront those issues head on and to provide meaningful alternatives. For my part, I think the best response to the left's project can be found in the American tradition itself. I believe our founders had a clear view of justice. I believe it was the best practical implementation of a political regime in world history, the reason for our wealth, our prosperity, our safety, our security. The good things in our regime flow from this view of justice that animates who we are as a people. And it is easy to mock that view now when people separate the ideas from the individuals and the people and the way of life that sustains those ideas. You can't separate the people from their view of justice and their way of life. They go together. But it is not enough, and this is a key point, it is not enough simply to claim a genetic lineage to the founding. There are plenty of white Americans today who can trace their ancestry back to the founding, who hate this country and want to see it undone. I don't think they're a majority by any case of that group, but they're out there. And what I want to show is there's a unity here between the people and their way of life, between the view of justice and the people who make that view real. And so I like my history. I like my country. I like the founding. I don't think it's perfect, right? There are questions to be raised. There are issues at stake. And I'm going to talk a little bit about one such area right now in regards to citizenship. I think the founders made a mistake, or they failed to fully implement their view of justice in a way that would have really helped us now. But their core principles are right, and I agree with them. The question of implementation, the prudential political question, is something separate. But the point is, our founding gives us a way to think clearly about politics, and by the way, it's at odds with the left-wing project right away. So if you're on the right, you can use the American founding, its symbols, its legitimacy, its historical relevance to the American people as a weapon against the left. A regime devoted to the protection of life, liberty, and property is fundamentally at odds with the Marxist, Rawlsian, left-wing radical project. The Declaration of Independence and the woke left do not go together. They are opposed. They are at odds. The administrative state that implements gay race communism in our own time is at odds with our fundamental constitutional order. The fact that in the post-World War II conservative movement, there has been an absolute dearth of those willing to take those principles and apply them clearly in our own time does not mean those principles are wrong. The fact that there has been abuse of our system of government, of our fundamental principles, does not mean that our system is inherently damned. It means that the people who have cynically and sometimes foolishly or incompetently tried to apply those principles are in the wrong, and they need to be pushed aside politically. It is no accident in our time that the loser right, the feckless post-war conservative movement in its mainstream instantiation was opposed to Donald Trump at virtually every turn. And that's because Trump represented a real attempt to try and win politically and apply to benefit the right, to take on the left, and to win real political victories. And the fake conservatives, the glorious losers, they didn't like it. They didn't like the idea of winning. They didn't like the idea of decisively taking on their opponents and triumphing. And you can see the failures of principled conservatism in the post-war order and its utter inability to undo the New Deal, the Great Society, to rein in the communist movement in the United States. The fact that we have wokeness reached the zenith of power that it did shows just how much of a failure that post-war conservative movement was. It did not conserve the country. It did not preserve the best parts of American life. It did not protect the traditional American population from abuse by radical elements within our own society. It was not able to conserve the American nation from mass migration. So that's a failure, but it doesn't mean that the core principles of our regime are rotten. It means that the post-1945 movement has been a failure. Those are two separate things. And again, the thing I like about the founding is the emphasis on consent means that the tyrannical goals and desires of the radical left are immediately run into a brick wall. They're at odds. It's something we can anchor ourselves to as a foundation for thinking through political life in a clear way. When we think about citizenship, the very idea of birthright citizenship is at odds with our founding. The Declaration of Independence says that the just powers of government are derived from the consent of the governed. I'm going to read a quote here from West's book. He cites the Massachusetts Constitution of 1780. It says, "The body politic is formed by a voluntary association of individuals. It is a social compact by which the whole people covenants with each citizen, and each citizen with the whole people, that all shall be governed by certain laws for the common good." But what does that mean, right? If the people get to compact with the individual, what that means is the people can say no. They don't have to admit every single person into the American regime. A people has a right to separate itself out from the other nations of the earth and to set conditions on who is able to join that political regime. Our view of citizenship today, Americans just stumble into citizenship. Most American men find out that they've become a citizen or are a citizen by the fact that Gillette sends them razors along with their selective service notice when they turn 18 years old. Citizenship, if you're a foreigner or an immigrant in the United States, mostly just means access to public education. It means getting certain benefits. It's just money. It's just a meal ticket that you punch. The idea that citizenship comes with duties, with obligations, that there's something more to the rights that we've received, that they should be exercised, that it requires certain character traits, a manly and spirited understanding of political freedom, of what it means to have property, to be a man, to be a citizen. Those things are all set aside because our view of citizenship, both for native-born citizens, Americans who are the descendants of Americans, and for foreigners, has been so stripped of meaning and purpose. We have lost the essential feature of the founders' regime, that the protection of rights is connected to the consent of the governed, that you must join. You make a moment of decision where before you were not a member, and then after you are, and you take on these burdens, and you receive something in return. A lot of young men today complain about the way in which, rightly so, they complain that the American regime treats them like pay pigs, it extracts resources from them, they don't receive a good life in return. You can see this in the problems surrounding marriage and the family. You see this when it comes to taxation, to welfare benefits, to the sky-high cost of housing. All of these things are bound up in government policy. If you are a straight white man in America, you're a father, you're married, you have a job, you are paying so that other people get to live a good life. Retirees, exploited minorities, marginalized communities, they require money from you. Foreign grifters who need weapon systems, whether it's the Israelis or the Ukrainians, the Gulf states, the Europeans, the individual American citizen who's productive, who has a job, is treated like he's nothing more than a mobile ATM to be drawn down from by whoever's in power. And that view of citizenship is that's not citizenship. That's slavery. That's servitude. The government that operates in that way is tyrannical, fundamentally. And what I want to point out is a lot of this goes back to our inability to think clearly about what it means to be an American, to think clearly about what American citizenship is for and what it requires. We just get taxed, right? The IRS just says, you owe this much. They don't even tell you what you owe. You know that you owe and you have to pay. It's just extracting resources. The idea that these resources should benefit you as a citizen, out the window. And a lot of this stems from our inability to think clearly about citizenship as such. So in the end, that's the core question, right? Who should be a citizen? How should that process work? That's the real question. Fighting over the 14th Amendment, and look, I hope Trump wins. I really do. And again, I don't even think the Supreme Court is the right forum in which to adjudicate that question. The Supreme Court is not the final arbiter on the meaning of the Constitution. For one, the branches of government are co-equal. If Donald Trump believes that the 14th Amendment means the children of illegal immigrants are not citizens, then he has as much right as the Supreme Court to insist on the executive department of the United States government enforcing his will. Supreme Court can rule in individual cases that come before them, but the idea that that precedent should be adopted by the other branches is itself a very spurious and questionable doctrine. How can you have a Republican form of government with meaningful elections when unelected judges proclaim what the law is? And that has to be the final word. This is clearly a problem. The judiciary, by considering the question of citizenship in itself, is usurping executive function. It is doing damage to a Republican form of government. It undermines elections. This case should not be as important as it is. Trump v. Barbara should not be the case that it is. This should apply in a singular sole case. Whoever it is that's brought before the court, who's appealing that decision, the Supreme Court's adjudication should apply to that person. And the precedent they set should then apply to future cases. But I will point out, even under our current constitutional order, Congress ultimately has the power to strip the courts of jurisdiction. And honestly, they should do that in this case. Republicans control Congress. This never should have made it to the Supreme Court. Congress should have said, no, the 14th Amendment does not apply here. And by the way, the 14th Amendment does not mean what the question of adjudicating the meaning of the 14th Amendment, not for the Supreme Court. The president's will is decisive here. That's all Congress needs to do. And it just points to the dysfunction of our political regime that that's not what happened. So again, let's say Trump loses this case. It's not the end of the world, right? Bad, not good for the country, points to deeper problems. But again, we come back to the core issues. The fundamental issues, the question of sovereignty, the very nature of our political regime are not going to be settled in a Supreme Court case. Absolutely not. In fact, they really aren't even going to be settled by Congress passing laws. We are getting to the point where it's extra constitutional, beyond the law. Because the law has been so eroded, the rule of law is so eroded that to think clearly now requires going all the way back to the foundations of just government and working from those first premises to the conclusion that we want. And from my view, the social compact theory is the standard. That should be the standard. It should be rooted in choice. The idea of the oath. It's just an interesting personal anecdote. So, when I was 16 years old, I became a page for the House of Representatives. I applied through my local congressman's office, Congressman Devin Nunes. Some of you may remember from President Trump's first term. So Nunes appointed me as a page. I was able to go, but we were federal employees, and we also held office. We needed to be sworn in to our positions. So we took an oath to the Constitution. I took an oath to the Constitution at 16 years old. And it stands in my mind, the clerk of the House. I remember raising my right hand and pledging to uphold the Constitution, right? That oath, that's the foundational element of what citizenship is. It should be. I think that's what the founders' principles are implemented properly, is that at the age of majority, whenever that is, you take an oath to uphold the law and to accept the duties of citizenship and also to receive the benefits of citizenship. And they're both clearly articulated. I'm at the point, the social contract should be explicit. To be explicit. What do you owe and what are you owed? And you should know before you're required to pay into the system. That's the real essence of all of this. Before you're required to pay up to make this political regime possible, it should be clear what you're getting. One of the most shocking things about the American regime, and this unfortunately goes back to the founding itself, is the fact that the social contract has been ambiguous. At the time of the founding, there was an implicit or dominant understanding among the people of the norms of American political life. Over time, those principles began to erode. And there were questions even at the time of the founding. Shays' Rebellion, the Whiskey Rebellion, the antebellum fight over the Tariff of Abominations, the Civil War itself, the fight over the embargo, the Hartford Convention. At the time of the founding, you can see there are real fights over the meaning of the American political order, what citizenship means, what the duties and obligations of citizenship are, how they apply. That's present at the time of the founding. By our own time, these problems have metastasized under the progressive administrative state and gay race communist, woke left, radical Marxist views that have infected and infiltrated the American regime and bent that state to their will. Right? So now we've got a real problem. What does our citizenship mean? We have to go back all the way to the founding. We have to think through the question there. At the time of the founding, explicit consent, it was sometimes given, and it's always given for naturalized citizens. There, it's always clear, because they have a moment where they're a foreigner and then they're a citizen. But for native-born Americans, those who are born to American citizens, that moment doesn't come. But it should. It's a necessary thing. It's a necessary thing. It needs to come. And so at 16, when I took that oath, that was like what that should be for all Americans. That should be the step. You take the oath. You sign the document, right? When I sign up for internet service at my house, I sign a contract. But when I become a citizen and join the social contract, it's never presented clearly. So that's a problem. It needs to be articulated. And that's a project that I'm intend to flesh out in the future here. We need to just get clear on what it is the government should be doing. That would help provide a real alternative to the left-wing project. We know what that is. They want to extract resources for their clients. But what the right should do, the idea that we deserve to keep what we have earned, that I deserve my property, that I deserve to be protected, that I should receive benefits from being an American citizen as a white man, that I'm not simply a pay pig for the system, that needs to be spelled out. We need to make that argument in a clearer way. So the founding principles are right. The consent of the governed is good. I think voluntary compact, choice, membership, the oath, that to me is the real instantiation of a just political regime. It's not what we have now, and in some ways have never quite had fully implemented in a clear way. But we need to start thinking about that now in our own time. Make citizenship clear. And moreover, we need to exclude people from our political regime who do not share its fundamental principles. There is no world in which foreign communists should be allowed to immigrate to the United States. Someone like Zohran Mamdani, who hates the American regime, should never have been allowed to become an American citizen. And I can guarantee you this, if the American people had had a choice, if they had a say in their own form of government, it was certain they would not allow foreign Muslim communists to come to America and spread hate and lies about our form of government. And moreover, to seize political power, that would be absolutely off the table. The founding fathers never would have adopted that kind of insane, suicidal policy for a nation. It's crazy. But we have that now. And part of the reason we have it is there's a lack of the consent of the governed. Immigration mostly not talked about by politicians at all. The Hart-Celler Act, it was pitched by its defenders that it would not change the demographic composition of the United States. And then it did. And Americans never really got the chance to vote on that, to articulate their views on this policy. Who's being admitted as a citizen every single year? What question could be more important? And yet no one ever answers. You never have a politician asked point blank by the media how many new Americans should be made this year. How many immigrants should we naturalize? How much is enough? How many is too many? How many is too few? Answer the question. For myself, I believe the United States should pursue a much more limited immigration policy now. We should not allow people to come here who are opposed to our way of life. That's a beginning point. Moreover, we shouldn't even bring in people who aren't a good fit to live here. Just because someone's a good person, just because they're just or humane, doesn't mean they need to come here and live. Just because they're a genius, just because they might be economically beneficial even. In a sort of basic GDP sense. It doesn't mean they should be here. It really is. Choice means choice. It's like, you don't have to justify yourself. Citizenship, you don't need to make an argument for why you're not going to invite someone into your home. It's your home, right? And if this is our country, if we've joined ourselves and our property to this political regime, and then a clear way, then this is our home and we have a right to exclude people that we don't want to be here. That's perfectly sensible as a policy, and that needs to be the foundation of our thinking about immigration going forward. And again, that question will not be settled in a Supreme Court case about the 14th Amendment. And that doesn't mean it's unimportant. It doesn't mean we should just dismiss political life out of hand or that we need to be accelerationists. No, I think we should. I hope Trump wins this case. I think it would be a huge victory if he did. It sets us on the right path, but it doesn't get us all the way to the end. There's still so much work to be done. And that work will need to be done regardless of what happens in the Supreme Court and what Amy Coney Barrett thinks about illegal immigration. So this country does not rest upon Amy Coney Barrett's ability to think. That's not, and thank God, right? We're going to need to do a lot more than that. So again, just to tie this all back together, in my view, the consent of the governed is the just foundation for a legitimate government. Consent, voluntary association. That policy is at odds with the radical left project of stripping citizenship of its meaning in order to extract resources from the oppressor class for the sake of the marginalized. The American founding is at odds with left-wing morality, with their view of justice. The way forward is to think these problems through to their foundation and to be ready to go all the way to the heart of the question in a clear way. We need to begin by seeing what is the endpoint that we're trying to reach. For me, it's peace and prosperity for the American people. It's our happiness. It's our ability to have our own country and to know who we are. That's the essential issue right there. Right there. There's a lot more to discuss. We can do that going forward. I encourage you to keep listening. I want you to like and subscribe. You can follow me on X at @JLippincott_. You can follow me on Substack at the blog Regime Critic. You can also read my writings at the website American Greatness. I publish twice a month there. You can also follow the show on YouTube. We're going to expand outward, get this into all kinds of different platforms going forward. Again, thank you for listening. I want you to engage. I hope I've provoked you to thought. Love to hear what you have to say. Feel free to DM me. Feel free to comment. And remember, keep your mind alive. Keep your mind alive. Keep thinking, keep working, and keep the faith. This is Lippincott Talk. I'm your host, Josiah Lippincott. Thank you. See you next time.